All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our bi-weekly Viceroy Sizer seminar. We are getting halfway through the semester. So today is our third seminar in the semester, and it's a great pleasure to have Dr. Sherry Lynn Conklin speak to us today. Dr. Conklin is an assistant professor of philosophy in the School of, I should get this name right, Politics, Philosophy, and Public Affairs, also called PPPA, here at Washington State University. She's also an affiliate with the Cyber Institute. In fact, she is mentoring two projects. Some of you might be doing that research this semester. Dr. Conklin, I had the great pleasure of having to co-teach a course this past fall semester called CPTS 424, whose its full name is Cyber Law, Ethics, Policies, and Rights, all that together. And this was offered for the first time, and it was a lot of fun doing this together. I learned a lot about ethics. I also learned about how to use the board instead of slides and have a rich discussion where students would participate. And this is a talk, I think, that is largely based on how students have been influencing the course, including its delivery, and Dr. Conklin has been taking notes. So when I saw what I invited her to speak and saw the abstract, I got very, very excited. So you should be looking forward to get an idea about what the course would be. By the way, it would be offered in spring next year. Consider taking that, but it would also learn something that will be insightful in terms of seeing cybersecurity related issues from an atheist point of view. An AI ethics perspective is what Dr. Conklin brings to the table. You know how this works. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I would be monitoring them, and we would get some 5 minutes or so towards the end, 5-10 minutes for discussion. I think that would be the best way to do. Otherwise, I think you also know you will have to kind of give feedback in the end, so don't rush to class afterwards. And so take the time when James brings a link in to provide feedback about the seminar. So I am very much looking forward to this, Sherry. So please take the floor and go ahead, get started. Thank you for joining today.
Just as a note, I'll be looking at the notes on my computer. So if you see me looking off in that direction, that's what I'm doing. I'm not paying attention. Okay, so I really do appreciate the opportunity to chat with you folks today. Before getting into it, I just want to note that this is a partially theoretical talk. I will be presenting some philosophical material. The goal is to provide a little background context for the observations that students made in class. I'm not going to have a ton to say there, but I am going to do an analysis of what the students were showing. So I think that will be a really fruitful discussion. And so this is also partially a reflection on the recent experiences teaching the new cyber ethics course here at WSU. And I'd be happy to answer any additional questions about that course and what it's about. So I think the work that we did in that class has really informed some of my own recent theorizing, specifically about privacy violations. I've also been working on privacy a little bit. And I think it also might have some interesting implications for cybersecurity practice. It's sort of an underdeveloped part of this work. I only, was recently exposed to this and was really excited about the work that we were doing in the class and the observations that students were making. And so now I'm trying to put all of this stuff together. Okay, so moving on, is it changing? I can't tell if it's changing.
No, we are, now you're changing.
All right.
You don't want to go.
Perfect.
Yeah, there we go. Good.
All right, so here's my roadmap. We'll begin with a little ethical theorizing to provide context for the observations students made in the class. I'll apologize ahead of time. Section 1 is much more well-developed than the later sections. I'm a theorist, so that's the part that I really get excited about. But I also suffered from a little bit of PowerPoint fatigue and eventually became tired of making the slides. So the later sections are a little bit shorter. Part 2 will go over some student observations about cybersecurity and ethical theory. It'll include a little bit of quoted text, but also a kind of a summary of some of the discussions that we were having in class. And part 3 will be sort of a catch-all section that briefly covers the lessons learned. All right, so starting with the ethical theory context. There we go, just switched. I genuinely can't tell if it's switching or if my computer's being too slow.
It might be slow. So we are on page 3, the context, ethical theory.
Okay, so it's on page 3. Yeah, so I have attempted to switch it. Give me one second. Maybe I can. Come on. Oh no, why is it not switching?
There's you know, at the bottom you've got this thing that shows the page number and left and right arrow. You could use
Perfect.
that. Yeah.
Problem solved. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I haven't used this particular version before. So okay. All right. So starting with some ethical context, I figure starting with an applied question might be especially helpful. So wondering this question: why does cybersecurity matter in the first place? So did a quick internet search. IBM has these great little explainers. So they say that cyber attacks and cyber crimes disrupt, damage, and destroy businesses, communities, and lives. And that security incidents can lead to identity theft, extortion, and the loss of sensitive information, impacts that can significantly affect businesses and the economy. CISA says sophisticated cyber actors and nation states exploit vulnerabilities to steal information and money, and work to develop capabilities to disrupt, destroy, or threaten the delivery of essential services. DHS says our daily life, economic vitality, and national security depend on a stable, safe, resilient cyberspace. White House says advancements in cybersecurity have presented new threats to our national defense and personal privacy. Criminal organizations and our foes overseas have continued to wage cyber campaigns targeting American civilians, as well as businesses. These attacks have disrupted critical services across our nation and inflicted billions of dollars in damage. Note 2 things about these statements. First, there's a strong focus on economic security, and second, national security. So starting with economic security, see my little coins coming out of the wallet? We're talking about something that doesn't have moral value on its face. Money is instrumentally valuable, it's not intrinsically valuable. So when asking about what matters, we need to be asking about why something matters to people. And when we're asking about the well-being of people, we're asking a moral question. So why does economic security matter morally? Well, it's because economic insecurity results in a lot of bad things for people. So economic insecurity can result in an inability to access important services like healthcare, to pay our rent, to buy food. You get the idea. It matters because people are harmed. And the same goes for national security, but frequently to a more extreme extent. So this leads us to the harm principle. The harm principle, in its initial formulations, goes something along the lines of the only justification for exercising power over any member of a civilized community against their will is to prevent harm to others. Right? So the idea is the bulk of our laws, the bulk of our policies focus on preventing harm. There might be some administrative stuff on rules for making rules, but even the goal of those overall is to prevent harm to people. And the harm principle has been largely adopted into a lot of contemporary ethics, and captures one of our core ethical values. So namely to prevent harm and to alleviate harm. And so we see this come up in a variety of different kinds of principles. It's coming up in principles that are being used for guiding AI ethics research. We see it all the time in bioethics. We see things like the principle of non-malevolence, which is the do no harm principle. We see principles of beneficence, which regulate duties of care. And then it also shows up in our various rights and duties, things like the right to life and the corresponding right not to be killed. So when we're talking about the harm principle, we're specifically talking about physical and psychological injuries. So if we're looking at a statement on why cybersecurity matters, it seems like a good deal of it circulates on the moral significance of harm. But harm as a moral consideration does not capture everything that matters morally speaking. In fact, there are many different substantive moral values, and the harm care value is just one of them. I have it there highlighted in reddish orange. And whenever I teach ethical theory, I teach moral foundations theory. which is a descriptive rather than a normative theory. It has a lot of problems. I'm not going to get into them now. If you folks want to ask questions about it, cool. The initial moral foundations framework is characterized as having only 5 foundations. 5 is enough to talk about, so I'll focus on these. It's important to note that each of these foundations is purported to be independently valuable without regard to the others. So as I go through them, maybe I'll say a little bit about how they're supposed to be independent of one another. But importantly, every one of these are going to interact. And so it could turn out that the badness of some bad outcome is going to be overdetermined because multiple things are going to be showing up at the same time. So it can be kind of confusing, but sometimes it can be hard to parse them. But I think we're going to be able to do it meaningfully in this discussion. So the first and most common moral foundation that people are going to appeal to is harm care. And again, this cites physical and psychological injuries, and that alone. So when you're using harm language, that's what it's referring to. Justice fairness. Justice fairness often has to do with questions about how we arrange our social institutions, and a little bit about how we're going to arrange our societies, and can be cashed out in a number of different ways, but the 2 most dominant ones have to do with the concept of deservingness or desert, which can be reward people or promote them in our institutions because of their merit, and so we might have a meritocracy, or it can have to do with things like punishing people because they did something wrong and they deserved it. Also, it connects to our concepts of equality. The third moral foundation is authority respect. We're kind of moving from, I think, most accessible to a little bit less accessible as we go on. So harm care, really accessible. Justice, really conceptually, morally relevant. Authority respect, students had a lot of trouble with. It has to do with the power to make and guide our decisions and then to subsequently execute on them. It can be associated with things like governance and stability, but also other kinds of things that govern us. So it could be our religious texts, it could be our traditions. But it's also connected to the concept of individual autonomy, which is self-governance and the ability to make decisions for ourselves and to execute on them. Though there's some muddiness here, sometimes people want to divide autonomy out, whatever. We're just going to stick it there for now. Autonomy is the concept that really matters here. The fourth one, perhaps less accessible, in-group loyalty. It has to do with our clannishness and our kind of tribal history, the fact that we depended on one another in order to survive. And just heading to the kind of core vice or kind of moral injury in this context, it's betrayal. And lastly, purity sanctity, which is actually a concept for a very long time that I struggled to understand. It was my Catholic students, my religious students, that were most able to really help me understand this conceptually and then apply it more generally. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the purity sanctity moral foundation. And just as a quick I think I forgot to mention this at the beginning. So we're talking about these different moral foundations. We're talking about different substantive values. And the idea here is that we can take all of the things that matter to us, morally speaking, and we can perhaps categorize them. And these are the different categories that we would be putting them into. And so here are some examples. Oh, wait. I reordered my slides. So what do I mean by purity sanctity foundation? Apologies. So I think this foundation has a lot to do with permeability. So our perception of being susceptible to things on the outside getting on the inside, and things on the inside getting on the outside, typically unwantedly. So here are my examples. So I think probably one of the most accessible examples is something like our reactions to disease and toxins. So when somebody sneezes on us, we have concerns about our physical integrity. We have strong disgust responses. We're worried about something, an illness on the outside of us getting on the inside of us and making us sick. Now, we can be correct or incorrect about whether or not something constitutes a disease or toxin. So we have things like the anti-vaccination movement that are, not empirically sound, but that's where the nature of the concern arises. It has to do with the sort of physical integrity. Another way in which the Purity Sanctity Foundation might show up has to do with purity of ideas, ideological purity. So we're talking about something like psychological integrity. It can result in cultural exclusion, and perhaps a really recent example of this is in sort of these frequency of book bans. So the rejection of exposing youth to woke ideology. Third, another really big one that's shown up and has resulted in sort of disastrous consequences, purity or sanctity of genetics. So we've seen it in the context of racial purity, but we also see it more generally in genealogical purity, things from royal bloodlines to purebred animals, even to, and this is my own analysis, I don't know the extent to which this has been discussed more broadly, but things like the violation that occurs if you discover that you haven't been raising your own biological offspring. Most of these have to do with the concept of dignity. Dignity language shows up a lot in the ethical literature. It's not always being tied into the Purity Sanctity Foundation. I think there can be some different meanings here. But dignity in this context has to do with respect for our status as humans. And I'll add appreciation for our various vulnerabilities. Some of the language that shows up in this context is violation, degradation, desecration, profane, dehumanization. They're all highlighting a particular kind of vulnerability and violation. All right. So with that context in mind, I'll now move on to discussing student observations about the relationship between cybersecurity and the Purity Sanctity Foundation. So I'm hoping I gave you enough to get a general sense of what it is. I'm calling it Cyber-Sanctity. So here's the pedagogical context. This was for a class that Asifa and I taught last semester. It was CPTS 424, Cyber Law, Ethics, Rights, and Policy. Typically, I introduce moral foundations theory as a framework for discussing moral injury beyond the harm principle. Typically, when we're talking about, I mean, honestly, when folks are talking about some kind of moral injury, most people use the language of harm, and we use it kind of without reflection on the nature of different kinds of injury. And I think if we overfocus on the use of harm, we miss out on other kinds of moral injury. So this is for the purpose of casting a wider net and conceptualizing different kinds of moral injury more broadly. So students explored moral foundations theory in each of 3 reflection papers. They were required to do it in the reflection papers. And it also came out in a final project. And I don't remember the extent to which they were required to talk about moral foundations theory in the final project, but they certainly did, in part because it was a part of their broader framework for analyzing ethical issues in cybersecurity cases. So unsurprisingly, no surprises here, harm care, justice, fairness, and autonomy in particular were most discussed across the board in all of these different assignments. And Purity Sanctity didn't really show up in any of the first 3 reflection papers, but showed up in some of the final projects, and also showed up quite a bit in the course discussions that we had, specifically in the context of privacy. All right. So here are some quotes from 2 of the different final projects. And so I think these are some of the most straightforward discussions of the Sanctity Purity Foundation in these projects. Both cases showing up in the context of privacy. So the first project here was on email phishing attacks. The second one here was on third-party trackers in healthcare. So here's what the students say. Sensitive records and private emails are considered sacred and private, and this data being leaked to the public contaminated that. The widespread circulation of this data left the employees feeling exposed with their privacy violated. Second group of students say one conception of impurity is the presence of something where it shouldn't be, such as saliva outside the mouth. We assert that this includes the notion of privacy. Medical information is consistently considered deeply personal, belonging exclusively to the minds and records of the individual and their healthcare providers. The students I had actually, in this case, had a much longer, really nice statement, but I wanted to kind of keep it truncated for you folks. So we're asking this question, why does privacy matter? Well, privacy matters because our data and information is sacred. This is what our students seem to be saying here, and we don't get it. We don't want it getting out, and specifically, we don't want it taken. So what does privacy have to do with purity? So the first thing, and this is part of a broader course discussion that we had, so I don't have specific quotes for this, but this is sort of how the discussion in class went. We were trying to understand the nature of privacy violations, and we established first that privacy violations are not obviously violations in the harm care Foundation, even though it's sort of one of the easy go-tos. So it doesn't seem like it's a purely psychological injury, in part because you might never learn that some kind of privacy breach has occurred. And similarly, it could turn out that that information or that data is never used in such a way that you're harmed, that it could cause economic insecurity for you, that, it could, there's no issue of identity theft, nothing bad happens to you. So, and yet it still seems like something bad has happened when our information or when our data has been taken. Not purely a justice fairness consideration. Now, it will inevitably be true that there are some people that are going to be more vulnerable to cyber attacks, and yet anybody can experience some kind of privacy breach. And so in that case, just as long as anybody could experience it, it's not purely going to be a justice fairness consideration. It sort of affects everybody equally when it happens. Maybe I'll walk that one back. If you folks challenge that, I'll be happy to walk that one back. Purely, it's also not purely an authority respect consideration. So specifically in the context of autonomy, where consent is playing a role, and it's certainly relevant. But here's a reason for thinking that they're not exactly the same thing. So, okay, what's the example? Oh, okay. Suppose I'm a politician, and my constituents have asked for my my medical records. They want to, or sorry, how about my tax records? They've asked for my tax records, and I think, it's a really good job, a really good idea for me to reveal my tax records to my constituents, so they have a better sense of, potentially who might be influencing my decision making. Make sure everything's above the board. So I am absolutely going to release my tax records. And in fact, I have contacted my favorite journalists. I have sent an email to my favorite journalists. They're going to release this information tomorrow morning. Except some point along the way, a bad actor manages to gain access to those tax records and releases that information 5 minutes before the journalist releases that information. Now, I have consented to that information being released. I intended for it to be released. I sent it to someone else so that they could do it. And in fact, the information was released at almost the same time that I intended for it to be released. And yet it still seems like something bad has happened to me. So it's not purely consent related. And lastly, it doesn't appear to be any kind of in-group loyalty concern. I might not know the culprit. I might not have had to rely on them in any particular way. Now, we can talk about various kinds of industry sabotage, whatever, but that doesn't have to have been the case. So what we need to know is, could privacy be important, morally speaking, in a way that is not connected to any of these other considerations? And I think our students made really interesting observations about this. Namely, that privacy violations often appear to involve bad actors on the outside getting inside unwantedly, and data or other kinds of information on the inside getting outside unwantedly, which is a pretty straightforward instance of purity sanctity foundation considerations. I want to quickly bring your attention to the idea that purity sanctity foundation has to do with maintaining the integrity of boundaries. When a lot of the other cases that we were talking about earlier had to do with maintaining the integrity of our physical boundaries, of our psychological boundaries, and so on. But I just want to kind of bring your attention to this real quick before I move into the last part of my talk. I'm probably going through this quite fast. I prefer to answer questions and have a conversation over giving lengthy talks. So, right. Lessons learned. So to bring this talk to a screeching halt, that's how my colleagues often put it when I reach the end of my papers. I hate giving conclusions. I'm going to briefly cover some lessons learned and then open things up for questions. Again, at this point, I do apologize. I was sick of creating PowerPoint slides. Very few PowerPoint slides left. My reflections on the course. This connection that the students made between privacy violations, cybersecurity, and the Purity Sanctity Foundation really blew my mind. So Purity Sanctity is not widely considered in the ethics literature. It's largely associated with religiosity, which is often not the focus of a lot of contemporary ethicists. And it is probably never, I can't imagine that it's ever been covered in cyber ethics or privacy literature. I don't imagine that you folks are spending a lot of time thinking about moral foundations theory, let alone the Purity Sanctity Foundation. And yeah, our students brought out its relevance to these very practical concerns and assisted in identifying a likely foundational value underlying our practical principles. And to see that, I'll bring your attention to the 5 cybersecurity pillars, hoping I got them right. So here we have 5 cybersecurity pillars. You folks probably already predicted where I was going to go with this, but integrity is one of the 5 core pillars that guide cybersecurity practice. And integrity is a central concept to the Cyber-Sanctity Foundation. And this matters because it's really nice when we have these mid-level principles that can help guide our actions and we can use them in reasoning about what to do. And they do focus on some of our values. But it's always important to understand how these principles are grounded to make sure that our practices are matching up with our actual values and to make sure those practices are actually aiming at the intended target. So it provides us with an additional standard for auditing our actions. So conclusion, too long, I didn't read. Purity sanctity is not widely considered in ethics literature. It appears to be a core value in cybersecurity, especially in the context of privacy violations. Understanding the value can potentially help us better assess our actions. And our students are responsible for making many of these observations. I didn't make these originally. I was putting these connections together at the same time the students were, and they were faster than me in making these connections. And so this shows that a cyber ethics course is valuable for professional purposes, but also for theorizing about the value of cybersecurity more generally, and for making progress on research questions in ethics. And I just want to say very last before I finish up, I think it also highlights the value of disciplinary collaborations between teachers and researchers in the humanities and those in science and technology. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Sherry. That was awesome. You were making me kind of get curious towards the end what the slides are going to be. Are they going to be empty? Are they going to be half sentences? But they were equally good, like the beginning slide.
I made the slides. I just got sick of making slides, so I didn't make many additional slides.
So they were just fine. So I think we have generous time. It took me back to the times discussions were happening in class. This was the time when I learned what it means and more on the theory and so on. The connection is fascinating. I always liked thinking of an abstract level philosophy, like everybody else. I've taken a 101 class back, in undergrad and a little bit later, and I remember liking the thinking around it. But it was very nice to see it connected this way. And you made the most out of what students were observing. I know there are some who were in that class today in this attending the seminar. So the floor is open. You can either unmute yourself and go ahead and ask, or you can put your questions in the chat. Either way is fine. And I'll give the chance to whomever says something first. So the 5 pillars of cybersecurity, most of you know the 3, the C and I and A, and then there were a couple others that were added. And so that was a pure coincidence that we've got 5 of them, and we've got 5 things in the moral foundations theory. And then there was some other thing I don't remember in that class where we had another 5 thing. And so it all seemed like it was perfectly coordinated, but they stand on their own. There we go. We've got one question here. Can you read? Sherry, can I read it? Should I read it for you? So the threat
I can read it.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Answer it, please.
All right. The threat of harm should probably be considered the same as actual harm. So if, I'm assuming that's an if the threat is real and persistent. Yeah. So yes. So I mean, is this a question about whether or not we should in fact treat them the same way, or is this a claim? You're like, I think they need to be treated the same way. Yes. To the first one. I'm going to take that to the first one. Okay. I mean, okay, so as a theorist, I would actually say no, but this is really from a purely theoretical standpoint. Just because I think that it can turn out that, like, suppose suppose I prospectively assess that if I shoot forward, that it's going to kill my nemesis. I shoot forward, and as it turns out, they just kind of walked right past it and it doesn't kill them. So you might think that I've done something bad generally. I've put other people at risk and so on and so forth. But did I do anything morally wrong with regards to the killing of the person? No. I didn't violate any of their rights. I didn't fail to satisfy any of my duties, unless you think that our duties are largely like, don't risk hurting people. So it really depends on what the content of our duties are. From the standpoint of purely practical purposes, probably just don't shoot into a crowd. And so when it comes to what our potential risks are, yeah, we should treat them as though, as a matter of fact, the bad thing's going to happen.
So it's perfectly fine to formulate it, but thanks, Judy, for asking that question. To write in the chat if you need to formulate it in a certain way. But you are also welcome to just speak, and you can kind of get it as you speak. Sometimes it helps.
Is there anyone here? Is
Can you
there
hear me?
anyone here who is in the seminar?
Sorry?
Is there anyone here who was in our class?
We have a couple, I think. James is there, I think, and Sean is there. So I remember those two. Yes, we've got a couple.
Maybe we can call them out, force them to talk a little bit about their reflections on this.
Yeah. Whoever is ready. Sean, do you have any reflections on what you've heard today? I know you did on something unrelated with healthcare, and so maybe for your project, that is. Okay.
I have a quick question.
No, absolutely not. Please don't call on me.
All right.
Sorry,
So there's somebody else got a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question was, which of the 5 pillars do you think is the most easily overlooked, and that we should actually, put more focus on?
Unfortunately, I think this is probably a question for Asifah, since he's more likely to see how this works in practice.
Right. Is your question on the cybersecurity pillars, or was it? I didn't quite.
I
get
guess
What do you mean?
it could be the cybersecurity pillars. I mean, I guess if you don't have the expertise to answer it from that perspective, but even if you just wanted to put your opinion on it in general, I mean, what would you expect, I guess, from your perspective, that would need to be, more focused on?
I mean, I think I would have to double check what most of these mean. Could one of you folks remind me which one authenticity is?
So this is something like when you log in into a system, so you are the person that you are, and so you have a password to create. That would be authenticity. I think maybe I'll say something, and then maybe you could take another stab on it. And the whole point of having these pillars, who was the one who asked the question? Ryan, I think it was, is that they're all important, and so it's not to be kind of prioritized. They're all important, and sometimes it might be there may be a connection between them too. So the information has got integrity. If somebody who is not authorized to get it may make that information not what it was before, and so the one thing would lead to another. But if you really wanted me to say something, the non-repudiation, which is the hardest one to remember, this is more like if I send a message, does it get to the right person kind of thing? If there is, a sender and then a receiver, did it get to to where it was supposed to be. And so there might be breaches, things that might give you chance to recover a little bit, and some that might have much larger consequences. If you start to put things in that sense, you may put a little bit of a hierarchy on this. Otherwise, the whole idea behind these pillars is that they should all be there to make sure that things are safe and secure, and they should all be there. None of them has to be violated. But I think I did give you a sense for that.
Yeah, I think I'll say also that non-repudiation was the one that I immediately thought of. But also, I just to highlight, non-repudiation is a very interesting concept to me. I do a lot of work on the nature of moral responsibility and blameworthiness, and also its relationship to things like excuses and moral justifications. And I'm just really interested in like the structural function of non-repudiation. So I think there's this really fruitful theoretical work that could be done in that context as well, just because I'm interested in its relationship to other kinds of more important moral concepts. So that's the one I'm most excited about. But also, I think when we were in class, I think it was the one that was hardest for students to remember, which means that it might be the easiest to overlook if it's the one that you're having kind of the most difficulty conceptualizing and kind of bringing to bear when you're thinking about a problem. So I think that sounds right.
Yeah.
I see there's another question here. Does denial of service or exclusion of access count the same as harm? So the reason I teach moral foundations theory is because harm as a concept refers to something pretty specific. It refers to physical and psychological damage, like damage to the body, damage to the mind, or damage to the psyche. And in one sense, there's a lot of things that we can break down and reduce to harm. So if, as a matter of fact, a denial of service or exclusion of access results in a physical or psychological harm, even if it's just emotional trauma, then it could constitute a harm. But we'd have to ask, is that the only thing that it counts as? Could it be a violation in one of these other domains? And so could it be that the reason that some person, some group, some company, some organization was targeted? Could that have to do with the fact that they're kind of representatives of vulnerable populations or marginalized groups? Then that would be connected to justice, fairness, and then they could be interacting. So all of these things can be interconnected. So it could be a harm, but other things could be happening at the same time, and we can be thinking about how they're interacting with one another. Does that answer the question?
I think it was good, and Ryan, I'm sure he's happy. Whoever has asked it, and so Sean, I called on him, but he said he's not at a place where he can talk. I know. There's attending this one sometimes means in the middle of some place where that's not possible. So, sorry, Sean, for asking. James, are you able to say something?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I also saw sanctity coming up a lot when I was writing my papers. Even if it's not getting your data stolen, it's like people think of their devices and their software as a temple of security. Yep. And when that's broken, all of a sudden you're losing faith in all sorts of the systems that you use.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there is a lot of discussion about how we kind of extend ourselves into our environment, how we can kind of come to identify with objects, the way in which our homes are also a part of how we conceptualize ourselves and what makes us safe. And when it's been breached, it's not just a violation of my space, but there is a kind of violation of me and my integrity. So when we're talking about this language of the permeability of the self, our perceived permeability, our bubbles of self can be expanded quite far. And so I think that's right. And so it makes perfect sense that we expand self into things like our computers, especially given how much of ourselves we're putting into the computers on a daily basis. I mean, I'm spending like all day, every day writing, and so much of my thinking and so on is present here. A lot of my activities, things that I'm sending to students, just my shopping, all that information and all that data is present on my computer, and it's mine and it's me.
Mhm. Great. Thanks, James, for the comment. Other questions or comments? That's also fine.
Did we read Sean's comment?
Sorry?
I was wondering if we had read Sean's comment.
Yes, I did. He's the one. Well, you can go ahead and read it and maybe reflect on it. What was saying? I think he was more of like the group's experience working on healthcare related and how much it made him realize the importance of privacy, but also some of the things that people have to abide by in terms of health-related, information being private, but more than that, the consent one has to produce and things like that. I think is what Sean is getting into.
Yeah, well, and I also wanted to quickly just reflect on, Sean, I appreciate you saying that this was one of the first times you wrote a paper on cyber where you felt a connection to what you were writing about. I think part of the goal was to try to help you folks feel connected to some of the ethical concerns, because it's really easy to talk about a lot of this sort of the theoretical level, or because it's something that you're supposed to be thinking about as you're kind of working on a project, but kind of spending some time to deeply analyze it, I think can really, really help connect to these issues as being important, as being personal. I see another question. Why does privacy violations have a problems with being defined as harmful? So it's not that they're not harmful. So the different foundations help us to understand different substantive ways that we can be injured, morally speaking. And surely we can experience psychological trauma, for example, and these sort of deep experiences of vulnerability as a result of having some kind of privacy breach. So having our privacy violated. So absolutely, that can result in a psychological damage. Similarly, it could almost certainly have a downstream effect of resulting in some kind of physical damages, right? If as a result of identity theft, you're not able to, get some loans that you need for, buying your car so that you can go to work, or, buying your house, or if as a result of you're, don't have access to your money or your accounts, even if it's not permanently, it still could make it difficult to buy food or to pay your rent. And those are directly harmful, physically damaging things to you. That said, the question is, does a privacy violation have to be a physical harm or a psychological harm? And if it could turn out that there's been a privacy breach that you never found out about, and that never impacted you physically, perhaps the information was never even put to use in any way whatsoever, then no harm occurred, but a privacy breach still occurred, and it's still bad. And so why is it bad? And so we have to appeal to other kinds of things. Perhaps it's an autonomy violation, but I think the example I gave helps to show why it might not be an autonomy violation. So there is one thing that is happening, come what may, in the context of a privacy breach. Something on the outside got inside, something on the inside got outside in an unwanted way. And I think that helps to highlight it. Yeah, that's a sanctity violation or purity violation. Yeah, that's exactly right.
We may have time for one quick question, maybe, or maybe two if they're very short. One thing I remember in this class, in addition to doing assignments and the final project, there was a debate that students have done, and that was another place where we saw taking a case and making a presentation to the class, and then another group of students would be asking this team to some critical questions and then going back and forth, which would give additional chances to go through these concepts and then see the connections and analyze the situation, who the the stakeholders are, when it happened, and how the connection with security and privacy from ethical principles, and also sometimes legal issues were coming. The ethics part was the most fun. I had to do the boring stuff for those sometimes, but they were all great things. So seriously consider the course when it's being offered next time. And for today, also don't forget to the link when this is finished. We still have a minute or so. If there's somebody who's got a burning question. So Sherry, we're going to ask you to send us the slides so we can post them on the Cyber website. This has been recorded, and so we will post that also on the Cyber website. This is a seminar that happens every 2 weeks, but 2 weeks from now you will be on spring break. So we will not have a seminar then, but we will have the week after. And that seminar, I will give it an informational session talking about a number of different scholarship opportunities we have. So you're all Cyber students, so you know about that portion, what's things that you're exposed to, including internships, for those of you who have actually secured now to go to VOD sites and do internships. But there is also a scholarship for service program we have that's funded through NSF. So we've currently 4 students, and then we'll have another batch of students for next year. And so that is open. So I'll talk about that. I'll talk about international program we have to go to Sweden for a semester, which is an awesome thing, and then a couple other scholarship related things. So both for you guys and also for students not inside my interested in this is what I'll be talking about. And that's 3 weeks from today. So keep that in mind. I am still giving somebody a chance, going once, going twice for a last question. If there is anybody who has that, you can go back and look at the slides and maybe watch and think about things. And I think Dr. Conklin would be happy if you come up with something to answer questions offline. Also, otherwise, I think I thank you very much, Sherry, for a very nice presentation. I really liked it. I'm sure students would appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Complete the survey, and we will see you 3 weeks from today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Great, thanks.